All right, we're back and we're reading some more about Wayside School, Beneath the Cloud of Doom. We're on Chapter 7. Chapter 7, The Closet That Wasn't There. Mac was a curious kid. When Miss Mush served chicken fingers, he asked her how many fingers a chicken had on each hand. After lunch, he played basketball. Besides playing, he was also the self-appointed announcer, describing every shot, every pass, every dribble. Jenny finally told him to put a sock in it. Only then, when he stopped talking, did Mac remember that he'd left his catcher's mask in the cafeteria. Mac liked to wear his catcher's mask for all sports, including basketball. He was a curious kid. The cafeteria was on the 15th floor. Mac found his mask right where he'd left it. But by then, it hardly seemed worth it to go all the way back down to the playground. So he continued up to the 30th story. And there, just outside his classroom door, was the most curious thing that Mac had ever seen. Next to the wall was some sort of giant closet. It hadn't been there before lunch. But that wasn't what made it curious. The closet was wrapped up in heavy chains and locked with a giant padlock. Mac moved closer. Behind the chains, he could see double doors with a steel bar clamped across them. Several signs were taped to the doors. "Keep back! Do not open doors! Danger! Call the fire department if you smell something unusual." Mac sniffed, but all he could smell were chicken fingers. Behind the chains and the steel bar, each door had its own lock. He could see two keyholes, one red and the other green. He put on his catcher's mask just to be safe and tried to peer through the keyholes, but they were too tiny. He knocked on one of the doors. It seemed to be made of thick wood. "Anyone in there?" he called. There was no answer. He knocked again, and then pressed his ear against the side of the closet. Still nothing. "What's that?" asked Dee Dee, coming up the stairs. Max shrugged. Dee Dee read the signs aloud. "Keep back. Do not open doors. Danger." She tried one of the doors. "I think it's locked," said Mac. More kids made it up the stairs. Each one stopped at the closet, read the signs, and then tried to open the doors. Terrence even kicked the doors. Jason rattled the chains. "Look, it's one long chain," he determined, wrapped around 4 times. "What do you think's inside it?" asked Leslie. "Snakes," said Paul. He was afraid of snakes. "Spiders," said Ronnie. She was afraid of spiders. "Monsters," said Allison. She loved monsters. "What if it is Mrs. Gorf?" guessed Calvin. Everyone shuddered. Mrs. Gorf was the worst teacher they'd ever had. "Give me a boost," said Mac. Jenny cupped her hands and Max stepped up, first onto Jenny's hands, then onto the steel bar. He gripped the top edge of the closet and tried to shimmy up. "Get away from there!" shouted Mrs. Jules. "All of you!" She had returned from the teacher's lounge, only to see the children hanging all over the closet, like monkeys. "Mac, get down, now!" Mac tried to hop down, but his foot got tangled in the chains, and he fell onto his back. "Oof, I think I broke my tailbone," he complained. "You're lucky that's all you broke," said Mrs. Jules. "What's inside?" asked Terrence. "Never you mind," said Mrs. Jules. "Don't you children know the meaning of danger? You are not to go anywhere near my closet. Don't look at it. Don't even think about it. It's not there." "But I can see it," said Mac, still lying on the floor. "It's not there," Mrs. Jules insisted. "But no ifs, ands, or buts," said Mrs. Jules. Everyone shuffled inside the classroom. Mac was still on the floor. He stood up and adjusted his catcher's mask, which had become cockeyed when he fell. He took one last look at the closet that wasn't there, then walked into the classroom, more curious than ever. I wonder what's in that closet. Chapter 8, Science. What does it look like they're doing? 29 hands were raised. There were only 28 kids in Mrs. Jules's class, but Joy stretched both her arms high in the air. She figured it doubled her chance of being chosen. She waved them back and forth and around in circles. "Pick me, begged Bebe. "Pick me, Mrs. Jules," urged Calvin, sitting next to Bebe. "Sorry, Calvin, you're too heavy," Mrs. Jules told him. "And your toes are too tiny, Bebe." Todd sat behind Joy, but Mrs. Jules couldn't see him behind Joy's helicopter arms. "Okay, Joy," said Mrs. Jules. Everyone else groaned. Joy was all smiles. "You lose, losers," she said as she headed toward the door. This week for science, they would be studying clouds. Luckily, Mrs. Jules's class was on the 30th floor. It was the classroom closest to the sky. Last week they studied dirt. That wasn't so lucky. By the time they made it down to the ground, science was over, and they had to turn around and trudge back up. Everyone brought their science notebooks and gathered just outside the door, by the closet that wasn't there. Mrs. Jules put her hands around Joy's waist. "Alley-oopsie," she called out, and lifted Joy straight up. Joy giggled. This was why Mrs. Jules hadn't chosen Calvin. He was too heavy for her to lift. Mrs. Jules sat Joy on top of the closet. Just above her, a trap door led to the roof. Joy stood on her tiptoes and pushed it open. This was why Mrs. Jules hadn't chosen Bebe. Her toes weren't long enough. A rope ladder tumbled down. One by one, the children climbed the rope ladder to the roof. "Be sure to stay away from the edge," Mrs. Jules called up to them. There was a safety railing around the edge, but it was for taller people. Mrs. Jules was afraid her students could slip right under it. She was the last one up through the trap door. When she reached the roof, she saw everyone standing at the edge. "What did I say?" she demanded. Everyone stared blankly at her. "Alley-oopsie?" asked Damien. "Well, at least somebody was paying attention," said Mrs. Jules. She told everyone to take 2 steps back and to sit on their bottoms. "But then we'll be farther away from the clouds," Matt complained. "Sometimes safety is more important," said Mrs. Jules. She pointed out the clouds to her class. "That one there is a cumulus cloud." Some of the students wrote it down in their notebooks. Bebe drew a picture of a sleeping giant. The cumulus cloud was his pillow. "And that's a serious cloud over there," said Mrs. Jules. Bebe drew a picture of flying angels. Hundreds of white feathers had fallen from their wings and had swirled into a cloud. Bebe could draw really fast. "What kind of cloud is that one, Mrs. Jules?" asked Benjamin. He was pointing at a dull, dark cloud way off in the distance. Mrs. Jules gasped. If Bebe were to draw it, her picture would look exactly like the inside of a vacuum cleaner bag while the vacuum was still on. But Bebe had never seen the inside of a vacuum cleaner bag while the vacuum was still on, so she couldn't draw it. "Everyone, back to the classroom!" Mrs. Jules shouted. "Double quick!" The children scrambled to the trapdoor. "Hurry!" ordered Mrs. Jules. Some fell right through. Others got rope burns. Mrs. Jules didn't worry about little things like that. She was the last one through the hatch, sitting atop the closet that wasn't there. She tossed the ladder back on the roof and locked the trapdoor. She climbed down, stepping onto the chains and steel bar. The children were waiting quietly inside the classroom, hands folded on their desks. Mrs. Jules walked to the side of the room and looked out the window. Either the cloud was moving closer, or it was getting bigger, or both. "What kind of cloud is it, Mrs. Jules?" asked Leslie. "There are times when adults hide the truth from children so as not to worry them." But Mrs. Jules was a teacher, and this was science. "Take a good look, boys and girls," she said, pointing out the window. Then with a slight tremble in her voice, she said, "That is a cloud of doom." The room darkened. Chapter 9. Gong! Louis, the yard teacher, was filling a green ball with air when the cloud of doom cast its gloomy shadow over the schoolyard. He felt an eerie chill as he pushed down on his air pump. Suddenly, there was a loud bang! And the next thing Louis knew, he was lying on the blacktop. He slowly sat up. He wiggled his fingers. He stuck out his tongue and moved it from side to side. He seemed to be okay. He stood up, still a little wobbly. Bits of green rubber were scattered across the playground. His air pump was on the other side of the dodgeball circle. The ball must have exploded from too much air, he realized. He always tried to put the maximum amount of air into each ball. The kids liked them bouncy. The bouncier, the better. He picked up a piece of green rubber, then another, and another. There already weren't enough balls to go around. The school couldn't afford to lose another one. He'd have to sew it back together. In the end, he found 73 pieces. It was unusually dark for this time of day. He hoped he hadn't missed any. The gong, he remembered. He hurried to the principal's office, stuffing cotton balls into his ears as he ran. "You're late, Louis," said Mr. Kidswatter, but Louis couldn't hear him. He wheeled the giant gong out of the office to the bottom of the stairs. At one time, the gong had been bright and shiny, but this was before Louis's time. Now it was dull and heavily dented. A large mallet, also made of iron, hung from a hook bolted to the gong's wood frame. Louis unhooked it, and then took a couple of steps backward to steady himself. The mallet was heavy, even for someone as strong as the yard teacher. He handed it to Mr. Kidswatter, who easily raised it over his shoulder. Mr. Kidswatter had thick arms, a thick neck, and a thick head. Louis started the countdown. 10, 9, 8. There was a red dot in the center of the gong. On the count of 1, Mr. Kidswatter swung the mallet and hit it dead center. Gong! Despite the cotton balls, the sound rattled inside Louis's head and echoed up and down the stairs. Louis took the mallet from Mr. Kidswatter and hung it back on its hook. He wheeled the gong off to the side just before a river of children flooded down the stairs. "Hi, Louis! Bye, Louis! See you tomorrow, Louis!" they called to him as they ran by. He smiled and waved, but all he heard was gong. "Why don't they ever say those things to me?" Mr. Kidswatter asked a little while later as they were leaving the school together. "Maybe if you did something nice," Louis suggested. "Like what?" asked the principal. "Maybe let a kid ring the gong." "No way," said Mr. Kidswatter. "That's the best part about being principal." "Or how about getting some more balls at recess?" Louis suggested. "Too expensive," said Mr. Kidswatter. "What if I paid for them?" asked Louis. Mr. Kidswatter laughed. "You? Where would you get that kind of money? Did you rob a bank?" "I have money," said Louis. "I've written some books about Wayside School." "But you got paid for that?" Mr. Kidswatter asked. Louis shrugged. Mr. Kidswatter frowned. Louis hoped he hadn't broken a law. "Do you mention me in those books?" asked Mr. Kidswatter. "Maybe once or twice," Louis admitted. "You don't say anything bad about me, do you?" Said Louis. "You should write a chapter about me," declared Mr. Kidswatter. "Call it The Best Principal Ever, with 3 exclamation points. First, you would have to do something that makes you the best principal ever," Louis explained. "Like what?" "Like let a kid ring the gong." This time, Mr. Kidswatter didn't snap at Louis. He was thinking about it. Louis looked up at the gloomy cloud. He hadn't paid much attention to science back when he was doing school. He didn't know it was a cloud of doom. Had he known, he never would have made such a dangerous suggestion to Mr. Kidswatter. Things are getting pretty interesting at Wayside School. We'll have to see what happens next.